This episode with Kai Hovland is fantastic. Kai's break-in story and advice will leave you feeling inspired and empowered. This is always the goal of the podcast, to help aspiring advertisers break in and thrive in the industry. Kai starts by giving us insight into why he left his creative role at VaynerMedia to work client-side at Duolingo, which I've been using non-stop and crushing the leaderboards as I learn French. Oui, je parle français. Et toi? We kick it back to how he broke into advertising. His break-in story starts at SCAD and tells us how he leverages offers to land his internship at a small shop you might have heard of, Droga 5. From his drug-dealing board game to discussing the client versus agency side, Kai does not hold back on how he's creating a creative career he loves. Oh, creating a creative career he loves. Interesting. In the end, he presents 7 tangible pieces of advice for those that secure agency internships. A senior year internship, which are actually opening up now, is one long job interview for creatives. Kai's 7 tips in this episode will help you convert from internship to being a full-time employee. And I'll give you a little hint, a little teaser. The first rule is, don't be a dick. Sounds simple enough. To connect with Kai and to see his recommended resources, please go to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. All one word, I'll say it again, at Breaking and Entering Pod. You're going to want to listen to what this guy has to say. And to Spotify users, in probably 3 seconds, you can help us out by pressing the star button on our profile and hitting 5 stars for us. That's it. And none of you have to worry about leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Despite helping our SEO and podcast get to more of our target audience, that takes way too long, and I don't expect you in any way, shape, or form to write us a review on Apple Podcasts. And this episode is supported by Chicago Portfolio School. They're a 1-year portfolio school option. Students come out with books that rivals those of 2-year programs and that creative recruiters love to hire. So visit them at chicagoportfolio.com. Now on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schallenberger. Kick it, Mikey. All right, Kai Hovland, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. Thanks so much for coming on. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Gino.
Yep, it's almost the holidays at the time we're recording this now, so there's light at the end of the tunnel. Have you been busy at work?
Yes, very busy wrapping up our New Year's campaign at Duolingo.
Duolingo.
Spotify Wrapped, essentially.
Okay. Tell us about that. You're a senior art director at Duolingo. Interesting brand side, client side, but that wasn't always the case. So we could talk a little bit about how you were agency side, you went brand side, but tell us about your current role as a senior art director at Duolingo, what you do.
Yeah, so I'm senior art director at Duolingo. I've been there for about a year and a month now. Previously at VaynerMedia and Droga 5. Essentially, my boss, James Kavinsky, who you should totally have on this podcast, absolute rock star, went to join Duolingo full-time to kind of help build out their internal marketing team. And so he needed to hire a senior art director and a senior copywriter, and it sounded like an exciting challenge. I wanted to see what brand side was all about.
Sure. So you were at VaynerMedia at the time you were poached, I guess is the term.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. So what made you say, okay, I'm in?
I think it was exciting, the idea of being at a marketing department at the very beginning of a company. So, Duolingo already had a really strong creative and visual voice from the design department and product team. And they were working with outside partners and agencies, but they really wanted to kind of start to invest in their internal team, like you've seen at Spotify and Google and other different startups. And I felt like that was an interesting challenge and a good time to join the team.
So Duolingo is the American language learning website, mobile app. I'm looking here, all different languages. To learn languages, you go here. What makes it different? What makes it interesting compared to the other platforms?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, the fact that it's fun and kind of gamified language learning is a big selling point. Essentially, you know, when you think of language learning software, I think the first one that comes to mind when we were in high school, middle school is Rosetta Stone.
Yep.
Exactly. And
So
I think
it sounds boring to me. Rosetta Stone, like those boring commercials, like
yeah,
kind of like outdated. I never put me off learning another language.
Yeah, exactly. And Duolingo's kind of come in and made it more fun. I mean, the company started with like ex-Google employees, and they really wanted to emphasize gamification, because what they've learned is, like, you know, you might sign up for Rosetta Stone or one of our competitors, and you get really excited when you first download the app or buy the books or whatever. And what ends up happening is you fall off. Like, you're like, I'm gonna, like, New Year's resolution, I'm gonna learn like Spanish, and I'm going to dedicate the next 6 months, and it's going to be super intense, and I'm going to buy all these books. And you start going into it, it's hard work and it's not fun, so you drop out. So Duolingo, our strategy is mostly to make it as fun and light as possible. And the idea is that if you don't get bored or stressed and you're with us for longer, you go further. So essentially, It's like you can learn more information more quickly with Rosetta Stone maybe, but the chances of you actually learning Spanish fluent is more likely with Duolingo statistically.
Are you, is it a monthly subscription or yearly? Like, what are the payment processes? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so there's two right now. The main ones are completely free with ads, and the second one is Duolingo Plus, where no ads, and then very minor benefits, but that essentially helps to pay for the platform.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Are you learning another language right now?
I'm practicing Japanese right now, but I will not say anything on this podcast because I'm terrible.
No, it's very interesting though. Awesome. All right. So I think a lot of people are familiar with Duolingo. So, but really we want to know about your role there and being a senior art director. Is it an in-house agency, or what's the structure that you're a part of now?
Yeah. So it's a bit of a hybrid role where we're kind of answering our own briefs as well as being the client, and looking at work coming from Whiting Kennedy, Amsterdam, Mischief, Craftsman Plus, and other vendors. Yeah. Oh,
so you have other vendors too?
Yeah. So it's a hybrid approach because our team is so small and there's so much work because it's a global company, from, you know, Germany, South America, Japan. There's a lot of ground to cover, so we kind of rely on our amazing partners.
Oh, now that I recall, Buchin is our graphic designer, creative director for this podcast. He won a pencil for his brief on Duolingo, I believe. There was
last year.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, my boss judged that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I forgot his idea. I think it was like a DNA box, like you get and you take like it was like one of those DNA tests, and then you would get tested and you figure out what language, and then you get Duolingo partners with you to learn the language of your heritage. I think that was his big. Yeah. So shout out Buchin. Amazing. So hybrid approach, you take on briefs, but you know, you're a growing team. You have to go reach out to vendors. Whiting Kennedy, Amsterdam, you mentioned. Who are the other vendors?
Mischief.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Awesome. So how many people are in your team right now? And are you guys growing right now? Are you guys hiring?
We just hired a production designer. His name's Neo, very talented graphic designer. My senior copywriting partner, myself, and our global creative director, James, as well as our awesome project managers. But it's a pretty tight and nimble team right now. Lots of hats.
I was just having a conversation with my friend about this, about transferring from. No, he was asking me, like, because he's not in the industry. He was asking, what's the difference between like an agency and then going client side? So what have you noticed between agency and client side? What are some of the biggest differences that you've experienced so far?
Yeah, I would say that traditionally speaking, there's a stigma that all the fun, exciting work that you see on Adweek, is coming from the agencies, and I think that's traditionally been true. But as companies' business models have been changing, I think they've been investing in their internal teams and essentially poaching great talent from different places like Whiting Kennedy, Droga, CDB, et cetera. And kind of, it's obviously much cheaper
Yeah.
to not
Yeah.
have the entire overhead, but at the same time, it forces you to kind of commit to fostering talent internally versus like, wow, they didn't nail this brief. We're now going to we can just move on to like the next team.
Right. Right. Because you can't fire your internal team. Like you can fire an agency pretty quickly. Like you just change it. You go, all right, we're gonna get a new agency for this, but it's a little bit different when you have an internal team. So there's probably more caution, a little bit more not caution, or there's more prep and ability to grow for sure.
And I think also, and this has definitely been true of my experience so far, is I'm doing a lot more performance as well as brand advertising than I was used to doing at more traditional ad agencies. So I think that's kind of the stereotype, is that, all the hardworking creative is being done in-house. And I think I'm definitely seeing that, but I think it's actually a pretty fair balance between fun creative as well as, hardworking driving sales creative.
Gotcha. Awesome. All right, let's kick it back to how you broke into. So we talked, I don't know if it was before this podcast started recording. You were an undergrad at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, and you studied. You mentioned to me, didn't you say you always wanted to be a graphic designer?
Yeah, when I was in second grade, I realized that for whatever reason, I was like, I don't want to be a fine artist, but doing business and art and design sounded really interesting to me. So I just had it locked in my head that I was going to grow up to become a graphic designer.
Okay.
And I just went on this path, downloaded Illustrator and Photoshop in like middle school and high school, got like Shadow in a small place in town. And then I went to SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. And I was talking to a sophomore, and they're like, well, you can be a graphic designer, and that's really awesome. You can develop your craft. Or you could be an art director and work in advertising, where you can still develop your craft, but you can also focus more on like the idea and work with moving parts and different teams outside of just, the nucleus of the design department. And I thought that was really interesting. So from there, I switched majors into advertising.
Do you regret that at all, or you're all good? You're happy with that decision?
I think I'm pretty happy with that decision overall. Yeah. I mean, I still obviously love graphic design, and I still buy design journals to flip through them. But I have like the variety of projects outside of branding and packaging that I think I would have done if I'd stayed as a designer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you recommend everybody if they have the possibility, go more so that art direction route rather than graphic design, or that was just what worked for you?
No, I definitely wouldn't recommend that. I think there's a lot more politics and meetings that you might be able to avoid if you're like a proper graphic designer. My exception of like a creative director having to deal with a client. No, I think it just depends on what you're interested. I was more interested in the ideas. The craft was important, but I think kind of secondary. But there are people who are all in on the craft, and I think they should pursue that passion.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting. So you transferred over to art direction, and then Luke Sullivan was your teacher at some point?
Yep. He was our chair of advertising. I mean, as you know, you're obviously having a podcast, as I heard, with Rushel in a couple of weeks. He's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. He's loaded up. I had to ask about him. I know. I'm excited to talk to him. I got to reread his book. It's been a while. So
yeah, Rushel actually did the cover.
The cover art. Yeah.
For the final. Yeah.
I didn't figure that out till after the episode. So bad research on my end. Actually, he did mention something. Let me go over here to his message on LinkedIn. He said something about board games, asked you about board games and how in Etsy. Do you want to explain what he was talking about there?
Yeah, sure. So I had a project that I was working on where I really, really strongly believe that creatives continue to create work outside of their job. And I think a lot of creatives, they focus on their job and they kind of burn out. So when they go home, they want to watch Netflix, have a beer, kind of relax. Yeah. I'm a big believer that you still need to, fulfill that part of your heart that wants to make things and have a little bit more autonomy on the projects you work on. And so essentially I was playing this board game and I was just like looking at the industry in general. And it's like kind of these tropes of like war. And I don't know. I don't know. I can scrap this part.
No, come on. So what's the board game about?
Okay. So I was trying to. I have a little bit. I'm like a little bit provocative, and I
Sure.
essentially came up with this idea of like, instead of like traditional games like Monopoly and other Hasbro games that are very family friendly.
Mhm.
I was just like, what if we made it about drug dealing, but still wrapped it with that like 50 style like illustrations and like playful drawings.
Okay.
But like you have like a baggie and it's like there's like a cutout like
Yeah.
Molly, things like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was determined to like see the idea through. Like it made me laugh. Like, it was fun testing it. But I also just wanted to go through the process of like, okay, like you have an idea, like how do you actually like make something and put it out to the real world? Like what are the avenues for that? There's like Shopify, Kickstarter. How do you work with a manufacturer? So talking to people in China, figuring out distribution to get it stateside, having a warehouse, taxes. They're like outside of just like the general, I have an idea, here's a creative, and like, here's a comp of it. Like, let's actually go out and like build it.
So you did this.
We did it.
You did all of it. Wow.
Yeah.
And this could be a whole podcast right here on this, but let's just, so it sparked your interest. You actually went through with it. And then did it solve that need for like creatives getting at home? And like when you were mentioning before, like, or was that just for you? Like you wanted to see something through like this project?
Yeah, I just wanted to see it through from like start to finish. And I have a lot of love for the game and I think it's fun, but
what's it called?
It's called Dope Man.
Dope Man. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. And we didn't do it for the money. We gave away all the profits to essentially helping people who got in trouble for drug-related offenses and needed lawyers. So it's like we literally just did from like the love of like making something.
Who's we? You want to give them shout outs?
Yeah. Liz Starry. She's an incredible industrial designer, and she understands like the pipeline of building a product and like working with manufacturers and distribution, things like that.
Wow.
But the reason why I love that project is like a project to talk about with people is because it's like, we saw the idea through. It wasn't necessarily like the best, like the most strategic game ever, but it was fun. And it was like, worth documenting with your friends on Instagram, things like that. But the important part was like, once we finished it, we could then like show people that we made something.
Yeah.
And because we put it out into the world and it wasn't just like an idea and it wasn't just a comp, we actually got contacted by like Fuck Cherry and What Do You Mean? Mm-hmm. And they saw the game and they're like, hey, this is a little bit too offensive for people like Target and Walmart and even Urban Outfitters. But we like the way that you think. And so we've gone on to actually make six games with them on the side. So we've like contracted out 6 different projects. Shit.
Wow.
Yeah, in addition to full-time work at different.
When was this? When did you start this project?
We made it in 2019. I think the Kickstarter finished.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And how's it been going? Sales are good, or is it still going?
Oh, the game was like we essentially had to like sell all of our inventory and just like get it done. But it was mostly the connections and the games that have come out of making that one game is
domino effect.
Yeah, exactly. Like a portfolio piece that you can kind of point to and talk to.
Interesting. Okay. No, that's a really good lesson though. And I'm glad we covered that. But
yeah, because I have, it's just like I have so many friends, and like I'm sure you have a lot of friends too, where like they're amazing creatives and they have this idea that they love, but they never actually like see it completely through. And that kind of breaks my heart a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I might have to ask you some questions after. I've got some ideas, but back to your break-in story. So you're at SCAD, you transferred in. Luke Sullivan, great teacher. He'll be on the podcast late January. So how'd you break in? Did you have an internship? Like, what was your first job? How did that work?
Yeah. So my first job or internship and my first job was at Droga 5. It was actually interesting. It was really dicey for a little bit. Like I was trying to figure out, all your friends are starting to get offers and you're starting to wonder like, oh no, it's like my book not good enough. Like, am I going to get an internship after my senior year? Mm-hmm. And essentially what I did was, there was another agency, I'm not going to name them, but a solid agency. They came in and they're doing like portfolio reviews at our school. And I wasn't actually picked as one of their like 6 slots of people that they wanted to talk to. But I essentially asked them, I was like, hey, look, if I just sit outside of this door for 6 hours, like when you guys are done interviewing people and like before your flight, like, could you just look at my book for like 5 minutes and just give me a critique so that way I can like improve it?
Yeah.
And they were generous enough to actually book me in as like their last slot right before they left the school. And the interview actually went really, really well. And they ended up giving me an offer. And when I started interviewing with Droga 5, I used that offer as leverage as, look, I had this other offer. Like, are you willing to like commit sooner? And kind of pushed them to giving me an offer, I think, before some of their other applicants, which got me into the door. Yeah.
Wow. That's a great story. I mean, first off, Droga 5 in 2015, 2016 is when you were there.
Yep.
So still, I mean, that was agency of the decade. Like, so I don't know if they were acquired just then. Not that it makes a difference, but Droga is one of the best agencies out there right now, and it was back then. How did you even get noticed by them? What was that process like?
I think I was very, very lucky. I think there were several factors. I think one, they might have started their interview process a little bit late in the game. So I think, this is my theory. I never confirmed this, but I did notice that they were one of the later places to kind of open up their internship in 2015. And I think it's possible that some of the top tier candidates might have gotten booked up by the Whiting Kennedys and the CBBs and things like that. And so I think that gave me a little bit of an edge.
Sure. But so the internship opened up and you applied through their online portal. Did you know anybody there? You just send your book through. What was that like?
So this is another example of being just incredibly lucky. So I knew someone, and I didn't realize this at the time, but I went to elementary school with their recruiter. Perfect. And during their application process, they asked for a video of you kind of talking about who you are, like why you want to work at Droga 5, like why you love like advertising, creative, things like that. And so I had my portfolio and then I submitted this like 2-minute video. And Brian at the time saw it. And honestly, he didn't even recognize me, but he's like, he's like, I feel like I've seen this person before. And he's just like, and their book is like pretty solid. Like, let's push them up into like the next like interview. And that's when we realized that we actually went all the way back to elementary school.
Oh, wow.
Up until then.
Incredible. Well, I mean, listen, if you didn't have a good book, and even if he did recognize you, you probably wouldn't have gone through. So you must have had really good work, and the connection might have helped a little bit, but really the work was probably what set you through.
Well, here's a third point that I got lucky was, and he never told me this, but I feel like I heard from another person indirectly that Luke may have written me a recommendation letter without telling me. Because I told him, I was like, oh, like, I'm interviewing at Droga, like they're my dream job. And he's like, oh, that's interesting. And he kind of left it at that. And I think what I heard is, I think I actually heard when I was interviewing, they're like, oh, I think Luke might have sent us a letter about you.
Perfect.
So it was just like 3 points of being really lucky to be under Luke Sullivan, who's an amazing teacher and thinker. And then, happening to have a little bit of leverage to push my application because of having a second offer. And then third,
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Okay. The recruiter thing might be your only, I might let you say that's luck. That one, you can argue that was kind of lucky, but everything else, you sat outside a room for hours when you didn't have the interview scheduled. That's persistence. And you got the book review with the unnamed agency. I'm going to guess BBDO because Atlanta, I don't know, but you don't have to confirm that. So you got that. You were waiting outside. You had a good book. You worked hard. You, even when you didn't have the offer, you were persistent and you showed up, and you that's hard work. You had a good book. I mean, Luke obviously wouldn't have wrote you a recommendation if you weren't good and you didn't know him and you didn't work with him over the years and you didn't show passion. So that's hard work. And Droga probably just liked your book. I mean, this is not like luck to me. This seems like a formula.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they all felt that I was very passionate, and I think that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what was your strategy with your book? Like, did you go for awards? Was it campaigns from classes? Was it passion projects? Was it your About Me section? I apologize, I haven't had time to look at it, but I'm sure it's changed a lot since then too. But when you were in the application process, what was your book like? What do you think made it stand out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple of things that I did. I think everyone has, smart, table stakes now, right? At any place that's looking at books, it's like they're going to look for insights, they're going to look for ideas, and they're going to look for craft. So I think that's going to be the same no matter where. I think the things that gave my book a little bit of an extra edge was that I shot some of the things. Like my roommates were all in film, so we were actually able to produce some spots where it's student work, but it's like shot in a red, it's color graded. There's a level of like craft to it, as well as having things that were like, for PayPal, I created these spots where we shot this kind of like stop motion animation with like puppets, and it was just like kind of going like a little bit the extra mile. And they're, they wouldn't hold up now. I would never send you the links, but they're just fun. And I think that they saw that I was just trying things and actually trying to make things instead of just being like, here's a comp of a billboard and kind of calling it a day.
And that goes back to your theme with this board game that you created, Dope Man.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you leveraged it with Droga and an unknown agency. I'm guessing BBDO, maybe another good one. I don't know. What else would I have to guess? Why don't you just tell us?
No.
That's okay. I'm just trying to get it out of you. My interviewer is coming out of me. So you started at Droga, fantastic agency, and then you stayed there for a year. What was it like working at Droga? I mean, you don't have to tell us what you were working on unless you want to, but what was the energy like there? Because that is like a mythical. So there's an allure to the Droga culture that a lot of people want to work at. So what was your experience like?
Yeah, I remember the first day I was there. They herded all the interns into a room to give like a quick presentation, and they kind of explained to us that this is a very like sink or swim environment where your boss is going to be very, very busy, and they don't really have the time to like fully mentor you. So we're going to throw you into the fire, and either you swim or you don't, and good luck. It was
did you like piss your pants, or were you ready to go?
I think we were all pretty excited to be there, and it was, it was an honor to work at Droga. I've heard that the hours have gotten a lot better, but at the time it was like a 90-hour a week type of place where you're literally sleeping at the office during pitches and things like that.
Right. But now they got acquired by Accenture, so they're backed up. I'm sure they have a lot more people working there. It's grown a lot since 2015. But no, you're right though. One thing we say at our school is like there is no on-the-job training for the most part. So you got to know what you're doing. And we say that portfolio school, but I mean, you were at SCAD, like that's a great school as well. Miami Ad School, Circus, wherever you go, that's what they're training you. That's your on-the-job training is at these programs. Not all the time you see that at some of these undergrads. So that's really important to know the process, and because you're going to go right in and it's sink or swim, like they just said.
Yeah, totally. And it was funny. There's this guy. His name's Devin. I think he's an ECD or GCD at 72 Sunny in New York. Amazing. But I remember him saying that's like, everyone's goal at Droga is just to be just as good as everyone else. Like you're just trying to like keep up essentially. Sure. Which I thought was like funny. It's like you're not even trying to exceed; you're just trying to keep up with.
Well, yeah, there's such a high standard, I'm sure. But you went from intern, and then you got hired as junior art director, or what was your?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So how was that? I mean, and that goes into your talking point, but you have a couple of talking points, right, about how to convert from internship to full time, right?
Yeah. Do you want me to jump into that?
Yeah, and put your own spin on it. with Droga,
Cool.
give us some experiences. But yeah, I'll let you. I'm glad you came prepared because this is interesting.
Cool. So I'll do a screen share. I know that this is obviously an audio podcast, but
it's good for me to follow along too. And to give context, you gave this presentation back at SCAD pretty recently, right?
Yeah, I gave this presentation. In 2017. I've kind of revised it from there, but essentially, I was trying to give these kind of helpful tips where you're at the point where you're a senior, you're graduating, you're going into your first like serious internship where people are considering you for a full-time position, and what I would tell them and kind of advise them to work on. So from intern to junior, 7 tips to help you get your first real creative job. First off, congrats on getting your first real internship. You now have roughly 3 months to impress your creative directors and make yourself so indispensable that they have to hire you. I was kind of like looking over this presentation again, and I think, there's a lot has changed culturally to kind of fight burnout. So I kind of want to preface that a little bit. The following advice is not on how to create like a healthy work-life balance. This is mostly what I do to recommend that you essentially put your best foot forward and making sure you get the 3 months. So it's working a little bit extra hard during this period.
Love it. Because it is an intern. It's like a long interview.
Yeah, exactly. You have that 3 month window, and you really have to try and impress the team.
Yeah.
So the first one out of the 7, this one's really straightforward, which is don't be a dick. Ad is a really small business, and people talk. At Droga, while I was an intern, everyone was like really smart and creative, and there was one guy who I actually thought was maybe an exceptionally brilliant creative, but he was such an asshole, and he was so like verbally abusive to his partner, and was just like not easy to work with. And at the end of the 3 months, they're kind of asking you like what you thought of the different creatives, and we kind of flagged that like, hey, this guy's really not someone we'd recommend moving forward. And he ended up not getting the offer to full time. But not only did he not get the offer full time, but when he started interviewing at another company, one of the creative directors then asked us, the interns at Droga, like our experience with him, and we told him like just straight up that like he was a nightmare to work with. So not only did he not get the Droga 5 internship, he didn't get the other internship. And because of his visa, he was sent back home.
Oh my goodness! I think Doug Melville, if you guys don't follow him, he has a really good quote. It's your name or your reputation. Your name and reputation enter the room before you do. Your name and reputation enter the room before you do. So keep that in mind. I love it. What's the next one?
The second one is keep it simple, stupid. This one's always kind of taught in ad schools, like your idea needs to be able to fit on a sticky note, or like essentially be able to sum it up with 2 lines. And I think that's really good advice, but I also think it's important in a way that I didn't fully understand before going to an agency, in the sense that like when you're talking to your client, you have this like vision of your idea, and it's like you're like, oh, we're gonna use this lighting effect, and we're gonna use this actor, and we're gonna do all these things. And sometimes the idea can be like completely lost, and it becomes very confusing. In your head, you see it as this like perfect vision. But if you can't explain that idea very quickly, you're kind of just going to confuse your client. And a lot of clients have a really hard time imagining creative before they see it. That's the whole reason why they're hiring you guys, is because you guys actually have a vision and know how to execute it. And so there's a lot that can get lost. So people say that about, clients, they don't really get it. But I also think it's important because sometimes even your creative director, they're still people, and they might be a little bit confused on what you're talking about. So if you can consolidate that idea into 2 lines, make it very clean and simple and buttoned up, it really goes a long way.
Love it.
The third one is stay hungry. Ask your CDs for more work. Be proactive. I heard this great story about Carrie Keenan. She was like former Deutsche CCO. My fiance was working as an intern at Deutsche while I was at my internship. And she told the story that, back in the day of fax machines, you're essentially assigned to like a client, and your client might have amazing briefs, they might have shitty briefs, but you're kind of more limited to like, well, that specific client and what they're working on. but she wanted to really prove that she could create amazing things. So not only did she like knock out her briefs for her client and did a great job, but she'd actually go into the fax room and go through the recycled papers in the printer, like that was like just done that day. And she'd look at those briefs and then solve them that night, and then go to the creative director and essentially be like, here's some ideas I had based off of what I saw.
Incredible.
And
where does she work now?
I don't actually know. I have no idea where she is now, but I always loved that story. Always stuck with me, like an example of like being really, really hungry to have the desire to make great work, but then also prove outside of just your core team that you were, a creative of value.
Yeah.
I think another example that I loved was, so when Droga 5 when Droga was just starting out, he essentially, was asked to come up with ideas, and he would essentially create 100 boxes in his journal, and he wouldn't leave until he filled 100 boxes with different ideas. And obviously at 100, a lot of them are going to be complete garbage, but just being determined to see it through and do that much volume, like, 3 or 4 of those ideas are going to be, they, just by volume, have to be amazing.
That's the process. Yeah. That's really what we preach here, 100 ideas at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Fourth one is plus ups. So, I think what some people don't realize, and I definitely didn't realize, is when you're in portfolio school and you're just learning about advertising, you're seeing the best in class work. Like you're seeing the Cannes Lions, the Grand Prix, and you're like, oh, like when I go to an agency, like I'm only going to be working on these like incredible like briefs.
Mm-mm.
And the reality is like those do happen. You will get those amazing briefs, but for the most part, when you're just starting out, you're going to do a lot of like bread and butter work that's, it's not exciting. Like their banner ads, their, basic social posts, their performance marketing. And to help entertain yourself and to kind of go the extra mile, I really recommend trying to push those as much as possible, just for your own creative sake. Mm-hmm. And I think an example for that for me was when I was at Vayner, we had a client, and I'm not going to name them, but essentially they had like the stupidest ask. It was essentially like, if Santa's sleigh had X company's technology, like what would it look like? And it was just supposed to be like a one-off like social post. And I'm like, this is so dumb. It's like so made up. But I was trying to find a way to like make it more interesting and kind of entertain myself. So I ended up downloading Cinema 4D and like teaching myself over the weekend. And I created like a 3D model of the sleigh with the technology and like made like a blueprint schematic. And like, that's what they presented. Like, obviously what they were asking for was just like, some type and like maybe a sketch, but like pretty straightforward. But it was so boring that like I had to find a way to make it more exciting and kind of like push it.
I love that.
5. So this also goes in the warning label that I had before that I'm like, it's not necessarily sustainable, but for that first 3 months that you're there, don't leave before the CDs. I remember when I was in my internship, Neil, who was the ECD or GCD, he eventually became the global chief creative officer and left to start his own company. But he said, if any of the interns leave before I do, they're not getting hired. And that kind of always stuck with me as kind of being like, okay, like, if your creative director's there, like, I'm sure he has like a family and a wife and kids, and he or she, and, they're putting in the work. Like, you also need to put in the work, and, don't leave early.
I love this. I love this one. This one is just a dose of reality. It's super simple, but it puts things into perspective. Because and you're coming from a perspective that's from Droga 5, so this is all credible. Like you have the right to say this because they're at a proven agency. They're top. Like they're good at what they do. They're the best in the business. If you were saying like, local like marketing B2B firm was telling me this, I would say F off. But this makes so much sense. I love it.
And the last one second last one is 6 is flirt with other agencies, so that way you can get leverage and see what else is out there. I talked about this earlier, but at 2 separate points, both getting the internship, having another offer on the table that you could point to, but then also when I was going from intern to full-time, I started interviewing while I was still an intern with different agencies to make sure that I had another offer that I could then use as leverage. And I really recommend that. One, because it just allows you to expand your network to talk to different recruiters and kind of get a sense of what else is going out there. But also it just allows you to either negotiate a higher salary or to kind of put pressure on them to speed up the hiring process, things like that.
Absolutely. Love it.
And the last one, 7, spoiler alert, everything is going to be okay. Trust that you'll get hired eventually. I think between graduating college and your first internship, I think is probably the scariest point in my entire career, as far as being nervous that, am I actually good enough to enter the field as, a real professional? Like, what's going to happen? Will I ever get a job? Will I ever get an offer? And I think those doubts are pretty normal. And, pretty much at SCAD, I don't know if this is still true, but at the time it was like a 98% employment rate. It's just like astronomical. And essentially it's like, if you didn't get a job, it's because you didn't want one. And so, obviously the markets and like COVID and blah, blah, blah have switched things around, but essentially just trusting that, if you keep working on your book, if you keep getting critiques from people and like improving, like eventually you will get a full-time job. And, I think an example that I think of is, I had a partner that was an intern, and I was 21, 22 at the time, and he was like 28, and he had started his career much later, and he got like 3 amazing internships. It was like something along the lines of like White and Kennedy, Droga 5, and CVB, but he never got an offer for any of them. And he eventually ended up getting an offer and going on to have like an amazing career. But just, sometimes it might take a little bit long. You're like, oh, I thought I was going to get it after that second internship, and just trusting that, it's a process, and everyone, it's not really a race.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Market's hot right now too.
Yeah. Market's super hot right now. This is a great time to be graduating.
Yeah. It's interesting, but these are great. These 7 tips to, how would you frame it again? What was the title of it?
From junior to intern, or from intern to junior.
From intern to junior, 7 tips to help you get your first real creative job. Perfect advice for our friends here at Breaking and Entering in our audience. So I appreciate that. Anything else we want to talk about? I think this has been a great episode so far. We learned about you. We learned how you broke in, and then your advice portion was phenomenal. And usually people don't do that. So I got no other questions. Anything else you want to, like, any resources you want to recommend, or how could people reach out to you? I'll give this last minute for that.
Yeah, totally. If you want to reach out at hovland@duolingo.com, and I will email you a list of books that I recommend.
Nice. Yes. Love it. All right, Kai, that's all I got. This has been great. You'll have to send me your recommendations for other guests, but have a great day, and we will be in touch.
Awesome. Same to you.
All right. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising podcast. If you like what you heard, it would mean a lot to us and help us grow and get better guests and better break-ins if you can go to Apple Podcasts and leave us 5 stars and a small review if you have the time. Be sure to connect with our guests if you like what they said by going to our Instagram at Breaking and Entering Pod. That's all one word, Breaking and Entering Pod on Instagram. We have links to their portfolios and their LinkedIn, and they want to connect, so do that. And thank yous. Thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio engineer, and Buchan Zhang, our creative director. Can't do it without you two, and a team from the University of Illinois. It's a student team from the agency called AdBuzz. They're a PR agency, and it's been a pleasure working with them. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next week with another amazing guest.